When billionaire CEO Sebastian Hawthorne humiliates marketing director Emma Rodriguez in front of the entire board, thinks he's won. But Emma's departure triggers a chain of events that will shatter both their worlds forever. What starts as corporate revenge becomes an emotionally charged story of two broken souls who discover that sometimes the person who hurts you most is the one you need to heal. Hey there, romance lovers. Tonight, we dive into a world where every choice has a cost and every moment matters. Shall we begin? The fluorescent lights of the 32nd floor conference room buzzed like angry wasps as Emma Rodriguez gathered her presentation materials with trembling hands. The taste of copper filled her mouth, where she'd bitten her tongue to keep from screaming at Sebastian Hawthorne, whose steel-gray eyes watched her with the cold satisfaction of a predator who'd just made his kill. Your role, Sebastian's voice cut through the suffocating silence, is to execute marketing strategies developed by people with the experience and background to understand real business implications. Not to waste everyone's time with ambitious fantasies. Emma's worn leather bag felt heavier than usual as she slung it over her shoulder. The scent of expensive cologne and leather chairs seemed to mock her now, reminding her she'd never truly belonged in this world of glass towers and inherited power. Around the mahogany table, 10 board members avoided her gaze like she was already a ghost. I understand perfectly now, Emma said, her voice steady despite the earthquake in her chest. You're not rejecting my proposal because it lacks merit. You're rejecting it because I don't come from the right family or attend the right schools. Sebastian leaned back in his chair, his 6-foot frame radiating the kind of confidence that came from never having to wonder where your next meal would come from. I'm rejecting it because it's unrealistic and poorly conceived. Your attitude right now demonstrates exactly why you're unsuitable. For senior positions in this company, the words hit Emma like physical blows, but she'd survived worse. Growing up in Queens with a mother who worked 3 jobs had taught her that dignity was sometimes all you had left to take with you. For 2 years, I've increased this company's marketing revenue by 250%, she said, looking directly into Sebastian's cold green eyes. I've brought in clients your previous directors couldn't even get meetings with. But you're right about one thing, Mr. Hawthorne. She paused at the door, her hand on the polished steel handle. I don't belong here. I don't belong in a company where brilliance is measured by your father's bank account instead of your own achievements. Emma walked out without looking back, but she could feel Sebastian's stare burning into her spine like a brand. What she didn't see was the way his jaw tightened, or how his hands clenched into fists as her footsteps disappeared down the marble hallway. 3 hours later, Sebastian stood alone in his corner office, Manhattan sprawling beneath him like a conquered kingdom. His phone buzzed with the 5th call from his father that morning. He'd been avoiding Richard Hawthorne's calls since the board meeting, but the old man's patience had limits. You fired Emma Rodriguez. Richard's voice crackled through the speaker, sharp as broken glass. She was insubordinate and her ideas were impractical, Sebastian replied, loosening his silk tie. The office suddenly felt too warm. Her ideas were brilliant, and you know it. Thomas Mitchell called me an hour ago. He said you humiliated that girl in front of the entire board. Sebastian's reflection stared back at him from the floor-to-ceiling windows. But he didn't recognize the man he saw there. Since when do you care about employee feelings, father? The silence on the other end of the line stretched like a taut wire before Richard's voice returned, cold and measured. Since Emma Rodriguez is your half-sister? The crystal tumbler shattered against Sebastian's office wall, whiskey streaming down the glass like tears he'd never allowed himself to shed. The sound echoed in the empty space, where his father's words still hung like smoke from a funeral pyre. You're lying, Sebastian whispered, but his voice cracked like thin ice. Richard Hawthorne's laugh through the phone speaker was bitter as medicine. 29 years ago, I had an affair with Maria Rodriguez. She was cleaning offices in this very building when you were barely walking. She never asked for anything, never threatened to go public. She just disappeared when she found out she was pregnant. Sebastian's legs gave out, and he sank into his leather chair. The Manhattan skyline blurred through his tears, and for the first time since childhood, he felt small and powerless. Why didn't you tell me? Because I'm a coward, Richard said simply. And because your mother would have destroyed us both if she'd known. Maria made me promise never to interfere in Emma's life. She wanted her daughter to succeed on her own merit. The pieces fell together like shards of broken glass. Emma's fierce independence, her refusal to back down even when cornered, the way she tilted her chin when challenged, just like their father did during board meetings. Sebastian had been too blinded by his own insecurities to see the truth staring back at him. She doesn't know, Sebastian realized, his voice hollow. No, and after what you did today, she never needs to find out what kind of family she's better off without. The line went dead, leaving Sebastian alone with the weight of his cruelty. He'd spent his entire life feeling like a fraud, inheriting success he'd never earned, surrounded by people who smiled at his money, but whispered about his worthiness behind closed doors. When Emma had presented her revolutionary ideas with such passion and brilliance, something dark and jealous had twisted in his chest. She was everything he pretended to be: creative, driven, authentic. And he'd destroyed her because he couldn't stand seeing his own inadequacy reflected in her excellence. Meanwhile, across the city in her modest Queens apartment, Emma sat cross-legged on her childhood bed. Surrounded by rejection letters from every major tech company in New York, word traveled fast in their industry. Sebastian's public humiliation had marked her as unemployable, a troublemaker who didn't know her place. Her phone buzzed with a text from Julia. Heard about 3 more companies pulling their interviews. I'm so sorry, Em. Emma stared at the cracked ceiling where glow-and-out stars still clung from her teenage years. Her mother's sacrifices felt heavier now. All those double shifts and sleepless nights wasted on a daughter who couldn't even keep a job. A soft knock interrupted her spiral of self-pity. Maria Rodriguez's voice carried the exhaustion of 16-hour workdays and 30 years of single motherhood. There's someone here to see you. Emma wiped her eyes and padded to the front door in socked feet. Through the peephole, she saw a figure that made her blood freeze. Sebastian Hawthorne stood in the narrow hallway of her apartment building. His $1,000 suit as out of place as a peacock in a pigeon coop. His eyes were red-rimmed, his perfect hair disheveled, and in his hands he held a manila envelope that trembled like autumn leaves. What the hell are you doing here? Emma yanked the door open, fury masking the way her heart hammered against her ribs. Sebastian looked at her, really looked, and saw their father's stubborn jawline, the same green flecks in brown eyes, the way she stood with her shoulders squared despite being cornered. I came to give you this, he said, holding out the envelope. Your proposal? I'm implementing it exactly as you designed it. Emma's hand hesitated. What's the catch? No catch. Full credit, executive producer title, and a budget of $50 million to start. I don't understand. Emma's voice was barely above a whisper. This morning you said. This morning I was a fool, Sebastian interrupted. And the pain in his voice was so raw, it made Emma step back. I said things that were unforgivable. Did things that were unforgivable. But I need you to know that your ideas are brilliant, and this company will fail without them. Without you. Emma studied his face, searching for the trap she was sure existed. Instead, she saw something that looked disturbingly like genuine remorse. Why should I trust you? She asked. Sebastian met her gaze, and in that moment, standing in the doorway of her childhood home, he made a decision that would change both their lives forever. Because, he said quietly, I think we might be more alike than either of us realized. 6 weeks later, Emma's project had transformed Hawthorne Technologies into the most talked-about company in Silicon Valley. Revenue projections exceeded even her wildest estimates. And tech blogs called Project Genesis the future of personalized marketing. But none of that mattered as she stood in Sebastian's office at midnight. Raindrops from the October storm streaking down the windows like tears. You've been avoiding me, she said, her reflection ghost-like in the dark glass. Sebastian looked up from his computer, his tie loosened and sleeves rolled up. The formal distance he'd maintained since their partnership began felt as fragile as spun glass. I've been busy with implementation meetings for 6 weeks. Without including the creative director? Emma stepped closer, and Sebastian caught the scent of her shampoo. Something warm and unpretentious that made his chest ache. What aren't you telling me? The question hung between them like a loaded gun. Sebastian had spent every day since their doorway conversation fighting the pull he felt toward her. The way she laughed during meetings, how she bit her lip when concentrating, the fierce loyalty she showed her small team. Knowing the truth about their connection made every shared glance feel like a betrayal. "Emma," he started, then stopped. How could he tell her that every time she smiled at him? He thought about their father's voice saying she was better off without their toxic family legacy. "Don't," Emma said, moving around his desk until they were close enough to touch. "Don't treat me like I'm made of glass. I've survived worse than whatever secret you're keeping." Sebastian's resolve crumbled as he looked into her eyes. So familiar, and yet so foreign. "You think you know pain? You have no idea what this family is capable of. Then tell me." Emma's voice was barely a whisper. "Help me understand why you looked at me like I was everything you hated about yourself that day in the conference room." "Because you were," Sebastian said, the words ripping from his throat like a confession. "You were everything I pretended to be. Everything I could never actually become." Emma reached out, her fingertips brushing his cheek with devastating gentleness. "Sebastian, what happened to you?" "The dam broke. My father had an affair," Sebastian said, his voice cracking. 29 years ago with a woman who worked in this building. She disappeared when she got pregnant, and he never told anyone. Never acknowledged what he'd done. Emma's hand froze against his skin. "Why are you telling me this?" Sebastian closed his eyes, unable to watch her face when the truth destroyed whatever fragile bond had grown between them. Because the woman was named Maria Rodriguez. The silence that followed was deafening. Emma stepped back as if she'd been slapped, her face cycling through confusion, realization, and finally devastating understanding. "You're saying," she whispered. "I'm saying we're half-siblings," Sebastian finished. "And I've been falling in love with you since the day you walked back into my life." Emma's legs gave out. She sank into the chair across from his desk. The rain against the windows sounded like applause for a performance neither of them had auditioned for. "How long have you known?" she asked, her voice hollow. "Since the day I fired you. My father called and told me everything." Sebastian leaned forward, desperate to bridge the chasm opening between them. "Emma, I never meant for this to happen. I never meant to feel this way." "Feel what way?" Emma looked up at him, and Sebastian saw his own heartbreak reflected in her eyes. "Like you're the only person in the world who sees the real me," he said simply. "Like every day we work together is the best day of my life. Like I'd burn down this entire company if it meant protecting you." Emma stood abruptly, pacing to the window. "This is insane. We can't be having this conversation. I know. We're related. This is wrong on every possible level, I know." And yet, Emma turned to face him, her eyes bright with unshed tears. "When you touch my hand during meetings, when you laugh at my terrible jokes, when you look at me like I'm the most important person in the room, I feel it too." The confession hung between them like a bridge neither dared to cross. "What do we do?" Sebastian asked. Emma wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, and Sebastian saw their father's stubborn determination settle over her features like armor. "We pretend this conversation never happened. We finish the project, and then I leave Hawthorne Technologies forever." "Emma, please." "No," she said firmly. "This ends now, before we destroy each other completely." She headed for the door. But Sebastian's voice stopped her cold. "Our father is dying." Emma's hand froze on the door handle. "What? Pancreatic cancer?" "He has maybe 3 months." Sebastian's voice was steady, but Emma could see the tremor in his hands. "He wants to meet you." Before it's too late, Emma's world tilted on its axis as she realized the impossible situation had just become infinitely more complicated. Richard Hawthorne's private hospital room smelled like disinfectant and dying roses. Emma sat in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, her hands folded in her lap, watching the man who'd given her life but never been part of it. Cancer had carved away his imperial presence, leaving behind hollow cheeks and eyes that held too many regrets. "You have your mother's hands," Richard said, his voice barely above a whisper. "But my stubborn streak, I'm afraid." "She never told me about you," Emma said. Surprised by how steady her voice sounded, I always wondered why she worked so hard to keep us afloat when there had to be someone somewhere. Who could have helped? She was protecting you from this family, Richard replied, gesturing weakly around the sterile room. The Hawthornes destroy everything we touch. Look what I did to Sebastian. Look what he did to you. Emma glanced toward the hallway where Sebastian waited, respecting her need to meet their father alone. 3 days had passed since his midnight confession, and they'd maintained professional distance that felt like emotional torture. Every shared glance carried the weight of their impossible situation. He's not as bad as he thinks he is. Emma found herself saying. Richard's laugh turned into a coughing fit that brought nurses running. When he finally caught his breath, his eyes held a clarity that seemed almost supernatural. That boy has spent his entire life trying to earn love he thought was conditional. I made him believe his worth depended on being perfect. Why are you telling me this? Because I'm dying. And I need you to know the truth about why I'm changing my will. Emma's blood turned to ice water. What will? Richard reached into his bedside drawer with trembling fingers and pulled out a leather portfolio. Hawthorne Technologies will be yours when I die. 51% controlling interest. Sebastian will retain 39%, and the remaining 10% goes to charity. I don't understand. Emma's voice came out as a croak. I can't inherit a company. I'm not legally your daughter. There's no record. There is now. Richard's smile was ghost thin. I had my lawyers do a private DNA test using samples from both of you. Completely legal, completely binding. You're my daughter, Emma Rodriguez Hawthorne. Whether you choose to use the name or not, the portfolio felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds as Emma opened it. Legal documents and dense texts that boiled down to one impossible reality. She would soon be one of the most powerful women in the tech industry. Why? She whispered, because Sebastian needs someone who can see past the armor he wears. Someone who challenges him to be better. And because this company needs fresh blood, new ideas, authentic leadership, Richard's hand found hers with surprising strength. Most of all, because I owe your mother a debt I can never repay. And this is the only inheritance worthy of her daughter. Emma stood abruptly, the chair scraping against linoleum. I need air. She rushed into the hallway where Sebastian waited. His face etched with concern that transformed into alarm when he saw her expression. Emma, what happened? He's giving me the company, she said, her voice hollow. Controlling interest. He's cutting you out of your own inheritance to give it to me. Sebastian went very still. What? Emma thrust the portfolio at him, watching his face as he read. She saw the exact moment his world collapsed, where his jaw tightened and his eyes went dead. Sebastian, I didn't know. I never asked for this, didn't you? Sebastian's voice was soft, deadly. Isn't this exactly what you wanted? Revenge for that day in the conference room? That's not fair, and you know it. Sebastian closed the portfolio with deliberate care. When he looked at her again, Emma saw a stranger wearing his face, cold and calculating as the man who'd humiliated her months ago. How long have you known? He asked. Known what? About being his daughter? About the will. How long have you been playing this game? Emma felt like she'd been punched. You think I knew? You think I planned this? I think you're very good at playing the victim while getting exactly what you want. Sebastian's words cut like surgical blades. Poor little Emma from Queens, working her way up through merit alone. Except now, we find out Daddy was pulling strings all along. Stop it. Emma's voice cracked. You're hurting me on purpose because you're scared. Scared? Sebastian laughed, and the sound was uglier than anything Emma had ever heard from him. Of what? Of the fact that he chose me over you. That for once in your life, being his biological son wasn't enough to guarantee you got what you wanted. The words hung between them like a death sentence. Sebastian's face went white, then red, then settled into an expression of such cold fury that Emma took a step back. You want to know what I'm scared of? He said, his voice barely controlled. I'm scared that I was stupid enough to fall in love with someone who's been manipulating me from day one. I'm scared that everything between us was just you playing a long game to steal my life. That's not true, isn't it? Think about it, Emma. You show up with these revolutionary ideas right when father's health starts failing. You reject every olive branch I offer until I'm practically begging you to forgive me. You make me feel things I've never felt before, then act surprised when it turns out we're related." Sebastian stepped closer. Emma saw something broken and dangerous in his eyes. "Tell me that's not the perfect revenge." Emma slapped him. The sound echoed down the hospital corridor like a gunshot. Sebastian touched his cheek, and when he looked at her again, Emma saw that she'd lost him completely. "I loved you," she whispered. "No," Sebastian said, turning away. "You won?" Richard Hawthorne died on a Tuesday morning in November, just as the first snow began to fall on Manhattan. Emma stood at his funeral in a black dress she'd bought with her last paycheck, watching Sebastian deliver a eulogy that painted their father as a visionary and philanthropist. The lies came so easily that Emma wondered if Sebastian actually believed them. She hadn't spoken to him since the hospital. For 3 weeks, they'd communicated only through lawyers and hostile emails about Project Genesis, which continued to break industry records despite the toxic atmosphere between its creators. Emma had moved back in with her mother, sleeping in her childhood bedroom while trying to decide whether to accept an inheritance that felt like blood money. After the service, mourners gathered in the Hawthorne family mansion, sprawling estate in the Hamptons that looked like something from a Gothic novel. Emma felt like an intruder among the society elite, who spoke in hushed tones about market volatility and tax implications. "You came." Emma turned to find Sebastian behind her, holding 2 glasses of whiskey. He looked exhausted, his perfect facade cracked around the edges. The past month had aged him years. "I thought I owed him that much," Emma said, accepting the drink. They stood in comfortable silence, watching snow fall through the tall windows. The house felt like a mausoleum, filled with expensive things, but empty of warmth or life. "I've been thinking about what you said," Sebastian finally spoke. "About me being scared." Emma waited. "You were right. I was terrified that he chose you because you're everything I'm not authentic, brilliant, worthy of love, without conditions." Sebastian's voice was barely above a whisper. "But I was also terrified because I realized I was falling in love with my sister. And that makes me exactly the kind of monster this family produces." "Sebastian, no. Let me finish." He turned to face her, and Emma saw raw pain in his green eyes. "I spent 3 weeks hating you for something you never did. I convinced myself you were manipulating me because the alternative was accepting that what we felt was real and impossible at the same time." Emma set down her untouched whiskey. "It was real, I know. That's what makes this so much worse." The admission hung between them like a bridge over an abyss. Emma looked at Sebastian, this brilliant, damaged man who'd been shaped by the same father who'd abandoned her, and felt her heart break all over again. "What do we do now?" she asked. Sebastian reached into his jacket and pulled out a sealed envelope. "I wrote this letter 2 weeks ago. It's my formal resignation from Hawthorne Technologies, effective immediately. I'm transferring my remaining shares to you, making you the sole owner." Emma's hand shook as she took the envelope. "You can't do that. It's your life's work." "No, it's his life's work. And I'm tired of living his life instead of finding my own." Sebastian's smile was sad, but genuine. "You were right about something else too. The company needs authentic leadership, fresh ideas, someone who understands what it means to earn success instead of inherit it." "Where will you go?" "I've been offered a position with a startup in Seattle. Clean energy technology. They want someone to help them scale up. And I think I'm ready to try building something from scratch instead of maintaining someone else's legacy." Emma.
I realized he was saying goodbye.
And the finality of it hit her like a physical blow. "What about us?" Sebastian stepped closer, close enough that Emma could smell his cologne and see the flecks of gold in his green eyes. "What about us, Emma? We're half-siblings who fell in love. We're business partners whose relationship poisoned everything we tried to build together. We're 2 people who care about each other but can never act on it without destroying ourselves. So we just walk away? We save each other." Sebastian reached out and touched her face with infinite gentleness. "I save you from becoming someone who settles for a love that can never be fully expressed. You saved me from becoming a man who resents the only person who ever made him feel worthy. Emma leaned into his touch. I'll always wonder what we could have been in another life, Sebastian said softly. In another life, we meet at a coffee shop or a bookstore. You're not my sister. I'm not your boss. And we get to fall in love the way normal people do. We get Sunday mornings and anniversary dinners and fights about whose turn it is to take out the trash. Tears streamed down Emma's face as she imagined that impossible alternate reality. In another life, you don't have to choose between loving me and being a good person. In another life, Sebastian agreed. But in this one, letting you go is the most loving thing I can do. He kissed her forehead. A benediction and a goodbye rolled into one gesture. Then he stepped back, straightening his tie and rebuilding his walls with practiced efficiency. The company is yours, Emma Rodriguez. Make it something beautiful. Sebastian walked away, his footsteps echoing on marble floors. And Emma understood that some love stories didn't end with happily ever after. Sometimes they ended with two people choosing to sacrifice their happiness to protect each other's souls. 2 years later, Emma stood in her corner office atop the Hawthorne Technologies building, watching the sun set over Manhattan. The company had become the most innovative tech firm on the East Coast under her leadership, and Project Genesis had revolutionized digital marketing across 3 continents. She'd kept the Hawthorne name on the building, but made it into something entirely new. Her assistant knocked on the door. Ms. Rodriguez, the new hire reports are ready for your signature. Emma smiled, signing the papers that would bring fresh talent into the company. Somewhere in Seattle, she knew Sebastian was building solar farms and wind turbines, creating clean energy solutions that would power the future. They didn't speak, didn't exchange emails, but she followed his work through industry publications and felt proud of the man he'd chosen to become. On her desk sat a photo of her mother, Maria Rodriguez, who'd lived just long enough to see her daughter running one of the most successful companies in the world. Next to it was a single white rose, replaced every Monday by an anonymous florist delivery. Emma never asked who sent them, but she knew. Some gestures of love were too pure to question. Outside her window, New York pulsed with millions of stories. Millions of people finding and losing each other in the beautiful chaos of existence. Emma had learned that sometimes the greatest love required the greatest sacrifice, and that letting someone go could be the most profound way of holding them forever. She closed her laptop, gathered her things, and headed home to the life she'd built from the ashes of an impossible dream. Behind her, the white rose caught the last light of day. A promise that some love stories transcend the boundaries of what's possible or proper or safe. In another life, she thought as she walked away. In another life, the end.